Expedia and Visit Scotland invite you to come step into centuries of history that await in Scotland. Castles steeped in legend walk along cobblestone streets. Come share the warmth of stories passed down through generations. This is a place with a past that is fully present today and all yours to explore. Plan your Scottish escape today at expedia.com/Visit Scotland.
For the News and Observer, I'm Dawn Vaughan, Capitol Bureau Chief and host of Under the Dome. Today's episode is sponsored by Duke Energy. Today I'm joined by Congressional Impact reporter Danielle Battaglia and Democracy reporter Kyle Ingram as you are listening to this or watching it, since we're on YouTube now also. This past week at the legislature, the General Assembly passed two constitutional amendments that will be on your ballots this November. Before I explain the two that are definitely on ballots from these recent votes, why is this happening so fast once it passes? That's my lead up, Kyle, to explain why it doesn't go through the process of other legislation.
Yeah, so constitutional amendments have a different legislative process than usual bills. They have to be passed in a 3/5 supermajority vote in each house of the state legislature. But once it clears that hurdle, it doesn't have to get approval from the governor. It goes straight to the ballots on the closest election after the fact.
Okay, so that's something that people will be voting on. The two that have already quickly passed both chambers. The House had the longest debate because they talked a long time about this property tax cap. Well, it's a levy limit. Let me break it down a little bit. So the constitutional amendment about property taxes is going to ask voters if you want the legislature to instill a levy limit on property taxes, which are set by local governments. There's no amount to it yet. So what this does, if voters approve this amendment, that's a job for the 2027 General Assembly to decide exactly what that looks like. They don't actually have to do it. The General Assembly already has the authority, but this would put it in the Constitution. And I guess it's more oomph to it, to a sense, on the property taxes. The income tax cap constitutional amendment is actually very specific. It would cap our personal income tax rate at 3.5%. This current tax year, it's 3.99%, but Republicans have already agreed as part of this budget deal framework to reduce the individual income tax rate next year to 3.49%. So this would not allow future general assemblies to raise the income tax rate, which has repercussions down the road. We'll be talking about taxes for a long time. The reason all of this is being talked about, in part, is because everything is so expensive right now. And one thing that makes things expensive is the other taxes that we pay, which are sales taxes and gas taxes. I asked House Speaker Destin Hall and Senate Leader Phil Berger if they would be interested in capping those taxes too, or in the case of the gas tax, something that other states are doing, like our southern neighbor Georgia, which is to pause the gas tax during this time where gas is so expensive. We're recording this just before the long Memorial Day weekend begins, with a lot of people traveling and thinking about how much everything costs. Y'all can read my story in the NNO about it. The short version is Berger is not interested in doing those. Hall is open to the discussion. So we'll see where that lands. The price of gas right now is tied to the war in Iran. Danielle is our congressional impact reporter. You see the impact of everything, we're feeling it at the pump and everywhere else. So what's the latest as we record this late afternoon on Friday about where things stand with President Trump and Congress and the war?
So right now we are in a ceasefire, at least as of 3:00 on Friday, but I feel like it changes drastically whether that's going. It's always iffy with Trump on whether he believes that that's going to stay or not. So I'm going to preface it with that. So there, to have a war, you have to get permission from Congress. This is a 1973 law called the War Powers Resolution, where you have to get permission from Congress if you're a president to go to war. Now, if you don't get permission ahead of time, which there are reasons to do, which, like, if you don't want to tip off the other country, or there's many different reasons why a president would not want to, he has 48 hours to go to Congress and get permission. Or actually, let me back that up. He's got 48 hours to go to Congress and say, hey, I just did this. And then that starts a 60-day clock. This is really important because after that 60 days, they either have to grant him permission to continue, or he has 30 days to get the troops out of wherever he has gone into a conflict. So right now we're operating under, and there's people on both sides saying this isn't right, but because we're under a ceasefire, we are allowing that 60-day clock to run longer than it should have. It should have been like about April 30th that we should have gotten this permission from Congress. So this has impacted so much financially for people because the Strait of Hormuz has been shut down. Ships haven't been able to travel through it as much as possible, and that is raising gas prices, diesel prices. We're seeing a large impact. And so you're seeing a lot of members of Congress, including our Representative Valerie Foushee. She has filed another War Powers resolution to try to force their hand, basically, and get him to pull out of Iran. And we've probably voted on this like 7 or 8 times now in Congress since this has popped up. It has not passed. It's basically, Senator Tillis is calling it a messaging bill, saying, you know, you can put this forward, but like at the end of the day, you need President Trump's signature on the bill. So like to actually get Trump to pull out is not going to be easy.
I'm quoting from your newsletter this week. If you don't already subscribe to our Under the Dome newsletter, you really should. Danielle does a Trump-themed one every Monday. I have a Governor Stein-themed one every Sunday. The rest of our team, we have daily roundups of all our headlines and everything like that. So if you want to keep up with all our politics coverage, that's another way. So you had in the newsletter this week that Trump told reporters, quote, he doesn't think about Americans' financial situation when it comes to the war in Iran. So how did that land?
I mean, it doesn't land well, especially, you know, we are coming up to a midterm election, right? And one of those things that everyone thinks about is those kitchen table issues. And, you know, the economy is hard. The economy was hard going into Trump's second term. You know, we were coming off COVID. We saw prices going up. Now we're in this war where prices are going up higher. People voted for Trump believing he was going to lower prices and help the economy. And we're not seeing that on the ground level. You're seeing, you know, I always harp on soda prices. I don't know why, but soda prices go up, egg prices go up, gas prices are going up. One thing that I hadn't thought about till I wrote this newsletter last week is like, I don't think I'm affected by diesel. Diesel prices right now, as we're recording this, is at $5.37 for North Carolina. I didn't think about all of the trucks that are bringing our goods through North Carolina or through other states to get them into North Carolina, that eventually will have other prices raised, like the clothing we're buying or the food we're buying, and all that kind of things that trickle down to us that we're not seeing. But like also North Carolina is built on farming, and like all the farmers are having such high increases in cost for diesel to the point where like they don't know if it's cost effective to grow their crops right now. So it's like having a major impact.
You mentioned the soda prices. It's like, what? This is twice as much as it used to be. It's pretty wild.
It is crazy.
So, well, doesn't any signs of optimism on the front and like from the DC perspective, do you think?
I mean, so if you look at just what happened this week, we were trying to fund immigration, which I'm sure you're like, Danielle, what does this have to do with Iran? And it doesn't. But we were trying to fund immigration, and just to give you a insight into what Congress is like, the only thing it wasn't the only thing sticking it up, but the biggest issue in it was a line item to fund the ballroom that Trump wants to build at the White House. They thought they could overcome that hurdle before the end of the week. But then we had a second thing pop up on a settlement agreement that gave $1.8 billion to January 6 defendants. And that basically threw the whole thing in flux. They basically waved the white flag, said, we can't figure out how to make this work. And they went home. Trump wanted this passed by June 1st. They can't get it done. They've gone home until June 1st. And so, like, Congress just isn't operating effectively, is my point of, like, no, I don't think there's any hope out of DC right now.
And that's our tax money, too, that they're talking about. All right, we need to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the other lawmaking body that went home and then more on constitutional amendments. We'll be right back.
This message is sponsored by Duke Energy. Duke Energy is meeting North Carolina's growing energy demand through a stronger, more resilient grid. That's why we're making strategic infrastructure improvements and implementing self-healing technology to avoid outages and minimize disruptions, all while keeping costs as low as possible. To learn more, visit duke-energy.com/NCFuture. This message is sponsored by Duke Energy.
You're listening to Under the Dome. I'm Capitol Bureau Chief Dawn Vaughan, here with Kyle Ingram and Danielle Battaglia. Before the break, we were talking about how everything costs a lot, and there are multiple factors at play with that, of course. Danielle mentioned that Congress has gone home till June. The General Assembly has also gone home. This week of Memorial Day week had been planned to not have any votes on the House side. One thing that Republican House Speaker Destin Hall has done that's different from his predecessor Tim Moore is give House members a somewhat predictable schedule. It's still the legislature, so things can change, but this was planned that this week is off. I have a story about that, with Hall talking about what's actually going to happen. Essentially, the top budget chairs are going to meet at least once during this week to work on things. Berger said that they decided not to have any votes in the Senate because the House wasn't. Senate Minority Leader Sidney Batch talked about all the people that don't get the week off. And House Minority Leader Robert Reeves, when I asked him about it, talked about the other factors of lawmakers. A lot of them on his side of the aisle in particular have families they're caring for, children at home, so it does give a break. And also for people that have spent a lot of time in the building, sometimes a break can make things change, maybe the tension a little bit when they came back. And there was a fair amount of tension, especially in the House, over the tax debate. So that's what's going on, those two constitutional amendments. There's also an override of a Stein veto that gives a federal tax break about private school tuition donations. There's more about constitutional amendments. Kyle, tell us both about the motivations for putting amendments on the ballot this fall, and then what else? There's another one that isn't even part of what they're doing this year that is going to be on ballots.
So we mentioned the two tax amendments that have passed the House and Senate and will be on voters' ballots. There was actually one other amendment that was passed in 2024 after the election that'll be on the 2026 ballot. That constitutional amendment would further enshrine North Carolina's voter ID requirement and specify that voter ID is required for all forms of voting, not just in person. But what that amendment and some of the other ones that are being proposed right now have in common is that they're really just codifying existing law and putting it into the Constitution, making it harder to change in the future. But they don't really change anything in the present, and that's why you've heard Democrats criticize these constitutional amendments as being a way to juice conservative turnout. They're putting things on the ballot that they know conservatives like voter ID. Two of the other ones that are being proposed right now are putting right to work and right to farm language in the Constitution. These are things that, again, already exist in state law, but there's a perception that it would drive out conservatives and help them in what might otherwise be a damaging year for Republicans, given people's views on the war and the Trump presidency.
Let's talk about two of these other ones that are working their way. Then there's nothing yet. The latest is that the House and Senate are talking about it, but not agreeing on passing the rest of these. One about Board of Education, one about filling vacancies on council of state.
Yeah.
Can you break each of those down?
So these two actually would make some pretty substantive changes. Right now, the State Board of Education has its members primarily appointed by the governor. He has to appoint 8 of them from districts throughout the state, so they're not all from the same place, but he's given the authority to constitute the majority of that board, or really all of that board. But under this constitutional amendment, the structure of the State Board of Education would entirely change, and it would be raised to 14 members who are all elected to the positions, and they'd be elected in maps drawn by the legislature. But as we've seen with some of the other amendments, the actual text of the amendment is very vague about how all of this would be implemented. And it just gives the General Assembly permission to go in and figure out all the details after the amendment is passed.
So like a giant statewide school board kind of?
Yes, but it would be in location-specific districts, and it's noteworthy that they made it 14 because he said, the sponsor, Representative Blackwell, said that he wanted it to match the state's congressional delegation, which is 14 members. So there was obviously the thought that if we're having it match the congressional delegation, they'll just use the congressional map as the map that the State Board of Education members are elected in, which, of course, has a strong bias and advantage for Republicans.
All right, what about this Council of State one?
Yes, so also has to do with the governor's powers. The Council of State is the 10-member executive body. It includes the governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, etc. When someone on that council resigns or dies or for whatever reason leaves their position before their term is up, the governor has the authority to appoint a replacement for them. Right now, he can really pick whoever he wants, but what this amendment is seeking to do is restrict who he can pick, and it would be that he would have to choose from a list of 3 that were submitted to him by the political party of the departing officer. So basically, you would have to keep the party of the person who's in that office the same for the remainder of the term. There was notably in 2024, the Labor Commissioner Josh Dobson resigned after the election, and there was a 2-month interim period before the new Republican, Luke Farley, took over. During that interim, former Governor Roy Cooper appointed a Democrat to fill that position for 2 months. So it was a switch in the affiliations, given that Josh Dobson had been a Republican.
It seems like it could potentially give the political parties more power because it's not just one, where the governor would choose one person to replace 2. They choose from among 3 that the parties send to the governor, basically, I guess.
Yeah, and Democrats were arguing on the House floor that they agreed with the general idea that the party should stay the same, but they didn't like giving the power to come up with the names to a political party. They thought it would make more sense if the amendment were to restrict the governor to someone of the same political party, but he still gets to choose who it is. But Republicans shot that down.
All right. Well, we need to move on to our picks for Headliner of the Week. Danielle, I'm going to start with yours because there's some explaining going on here, and it has to do with the federal government.
Yeah, so I kind of teased this a little bit, but Senator Tillis and President Trump have ended up in a war on Friday morning. And this has to do with that bill that I told you fell apart. So Senator Tillis has been very against the ballroom funding being part of this DHS package. And we knew that had that stayed into the bill, he would have tanked the bill. So there's a couple Republicans that have made that clear. And so what I believe we thought was going to happen was an amendment would strip that out of the bill once it reached the floor, or it would be stripped out before it reached the floor. But once this 1 point, and by the way, I learned earlier today, it's $1.776 billion.
Oh,
76.
see what they did there.
It's the settlement money. Once that became a thing, they're afraid that there's going to be an amendment to slide it into the same DHS funding bill. And they knew there's enough Republicans upset about it, Tillis being one of them, to, kill this bill. So he called it stupid on stilts, the funding amount, or funding in general, and said basically to fund this, you're using taxpayer dollars to give to a cause that they don't believe in, and that is stupid on stilts. And President Trump shot back that he is a weak senator that no one remembers. And now they're having a back and forth on social media, which is fun because they're not even on the same social media site fighting.
I don't think North Carolina is going to forget who Tom Tillis is anytime soon, or, a fair amount of America.
I do find it funny for how much attention he's getting right now to say, he's forgotten. No.
Yeah. If anything, it just amplifies.
Yeah.
Amplifies it, right? All right, Kyle, what's your pick for a Headliner of the Week?
So amidst all the flurry of constitutional amendments and talking about the budget, one thing that sort of has slipped under the radar is that there does appear to be some movement towards this effort of reducing the amount of early voting days in North Carolina. Republicans have brought this up for a long time. We have a relatively long early voting period here. It's 17 days for both the primary and the general. At the beginning of the session, we heard Senate Leader Phil Berger express some support for reducing those days, maybe just in the primary. But then we saw this past week some high-ranking state senators introduce a bill to reduce the early voting period to 10 days for all elections, primary and general. So we'll see if that gets assigned to committees and starts moving forward. Both leaders have said that it's something they're open to.
Okay. And I'll wrap up the podcast with my pick for headliner of the week. Memorial Day. It's a time that the United States honors our war dead and really just, appreciate all of our service members' sacrifice and those who are currently serving. It's important to note the difference between Memorial Day and Veterans Day. Memorial Day remembers those that have died, and Veterans Day is for those that are living, and that's not until November. And it'll be probably my headliner of the week, and that, although that's right after the election, so maybe something election related. All right, we are out of time for the News and Observer. I'm Dawn Vaughan with Danielle Battaglia, Kyle Ingram, and producer Kevin Keister. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Under the Dome, sponsored by Duke Energy, and we'll talk to you next time.
For more from our politics team, subscribe to the News and Observer at newsobserver.com/subscribe. Follow us on Twitter at Under the Dome and NC Insider, and sign up for our weekly political newsletter, also called Under the Dome, at newsobserver.com/newsletters. Thanks for listening.